So if you're listening, remember this. The truth doesn't destroy you. It reveals who you really are.
They say justice is blind. But that night, I learned it can also cry. I had just sentenced a man to life without parole, a decision that should have been routine after 30 years on the bench. Yet, as the courtroom emptied and the echo of the gavel faded, something inside me refused to settle. His name was Michael Carter. 45 years old. Convicted of murdering his wife, Anna, a woman the community loved, a mother of two. The evidence was clean, the jury unanimous. And still, when I looked into his eyes before reading the verdict, I saw something that shouldn't have been there, not defiance, not guilt, but grief. It haunted me. After court, I sat in my chambers, the scent of stale coffee mixing with the rain pressing against my window. The courthouse lights dimmed, leaving long shadows across the floor. I removed my robe, folded it carefully on the chair, and whispered to no one. Did I just destroy an innocent man? You see, judges aren't supposed to feel doubt. We're trained to bury it under evidence and procedure. But the truth is, doubt doesn't vanish when the gavel falls, it just hides deeper, waiting for the night to come. That night, it came for me. I couldn't sleep. I replayed the testimonies, the evidence, the photos of Anna's lifeless body on the floor. Her eyes still open, as if questioning the world. And behind those images, Michael's last words echoed. I didn't kill her, Judge. I loved her. You'll see one day. The next morning, I told myself I was being emotional, that justice had been served. But justice, I would soon learn, is not a single act. It's a living thing, and when you wound it, it bleeds through every life it touches. And in the weeks that followed, I began to bleed with it. 3 weeks after the verdict, the courthouse mail clerk dropped a thick beige envelope on my desk. No return address. No seal. Just my name, Judge Estelle Monroe, written in trembling black ink. I almost tossed it aside. Judges get their fair share of hate mail, bitter relatives, conspiracy theorists, the occasional inmate who believes the Illuminati runs the justice system. But something about this envelope made my fingers pause. It wasn't anger I felt in the handwriting, it was desperation. I tore it open. Inside was a single page. Typed. No greeting, no sign-off. Just one line that burned itself into me. You put the wrong man away. Look at the footage, March 16th, 9:47 p.m., alley behind Ridge Street Market. My breath caught. That was the night of the murder. I read it again. And again. My hands trembled. I checked the case records. There was no mention of any surveillance footage. I remembered every word of that trial, every exhibit, every testimony. The prosecution's timeline put Michael at the scene based on a neighbor's account and a broken wristwatch found near the body. But video? None. I sat there, staring at that paper until the words blurred. Judges don't reopen cases. Not based on anonymous letters. Not without evidence. And certainly not without a request from counsel. But I couldn't shake it. The rest of that day, I went through the motions, hearings, motions, signatures, like a ghost wearing my own skin. My clerk, Olivia, asked if I was all right. I lied. Just tired, I said. That night, as thunder rolled across the city, I opened my laptop and typed Ridge Street Market Surveillance Archives. Nothing. I called the local precinct, used my position, my name. The detective who picked up hesitated when I asked. That place burned down, Judge. 6 months before the trial. Cameras were fried. But what about backups? I pressed. He sighed. We checked. All destroyed. If something existed, it's gone now. Still, something in his tone made my skin crawl, like he wasn't telling me everything. At 2 a.m., unable to rest, I drove to Ridge Street myself. The rain had just stopped. The street glistened like black glass under the lamps. The market was boarded up, half demolished. I stood there in the silence, breathing the scent of wet asphalt and regret. And that's when I saw it, faint but clear. A small camera still mounted high above the alley, its lens cracked but intact. Why hadn't anyone removed it? I pulled out my phone, zoomed in. A sticker clung to the side of the casing, Ridge City Security Company. The company no longer existed, it had merged years ago. But my gut told me this camera might still hold something, or someone wanted me to believe it did. As I stood there, a voice cut through the night. Judge Monroe? I froze. A man in a gray hoodie stood at the end of the alley. I couldn't see his face. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Who are you? I demanded. He turned, half lit by the lamplight. Sometimes justice forgets to look in the dark. And then he was gone. I drove home shaking, the envelope on my passenger seat. By dawn, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find the truth, even if it destroyed the very system I'd spent my life protecting. Sleep abandoned me after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man in the alley, his gray hoodie blending into the fog, his voice echoing like a warning carved into the dark. Sometimes justice forgets to look in the dark. I tried to bury myself in routine. Morning hearings. Case reviews. Signatures that carried lives within them. But my mind refused to stay inside the courtroom. It was back on Ridge Street, replaying that voice, that envelope, that cracked lens watching over nothing. By the fourth day, I couldn't take it anymore. I made a call, not to the police, not to a lawyer, but to an old friend from before the robe, before the oath. Detective Samuel Rhodes. We'd worked together 20 years ago when I was still a prosecutor, before ambition turned me into something colder, quieter. He picked up on the second ring. Estelle Monroe, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Didn't think I'd hear from you unless someone resurrected Al Capone. Sam, I breathed out, trying to sound casual. I need a favor. Off the record. The humor vanished. That sounds dangerous. I don't know yet. Maybe it's nothing. He hesitated. And maybe it's everything. We met that evening at a diner just off the interstate, the kind of place where coffee never stops burning and no one asks questions. Sam looked older. Grayer. But his eyes still had that restless spark, the kind that sees what others miss. So, he said, leaning forward. Talk to me. I told him everything, the letter, the footage, the man in the alley. He didn't interrupt, didn't laugh. When I finished, he slid his cup away and rubbed his chin. You think someone buried evidence in the Carter case? I paused. I don't know what to think. But if that footage exists, I want to find it. Sam nodded slowly. And if it doesn't? Then I can live with that. But if I put an innocent man behind bars? He cut me off gently. You won't live with that. We sat in silence for a while. The diner clock ticked louder than it should have. Finally, he said, Ridge City Security merged with Falcon Data Services 3 years ago. They're in Midtown now. If that camera recorded anything, it'd be archived there. My heart pounded. Can you access it? He smirked. You forget who you're talking to. The next day, he called. Estelle, you're not going to like this. What? The footage exists. But it's sealed. Access restricted by federal request, Department of Justice tag. Someone up high didn't want anyone seeing it. The room tilted for a moment. Can you get it? A long silence. Not without leaving fingerprints. I lowered my voice. Then use mine. That night, I waited in my car outside the Falcon Data building, a 14-story mirror of glass and steel. Sam went in alone, using an old contractor badge. My stomach twisted with every passing minute. At 2:13 a.m., he texted one word. Got it. He slipped into the passenger seat, soaked in sweat, clutching a small USB drive in his fist. "I had to dig deep," he said, eyes darting around. "Whoever sealed this knew what they were doing." I stared at the drive like it was radioactive. "What's on it?" He looked at me, the reflection of streetlights flickering in his tired eyes. "You sure you want to see it?" "Yes." He handed it over. "Then remember this moment. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it." I drove home through empty streets, heart pounding like a drum. At 3 a.m., I inserted the drive into my laptop. The video opened. Grainy black and white. Date, March 16, 9:47 p.m. The alley appeared, rain pouring down, same as I remembered. Then a figure entered the frame. A woman. Running. Anna Carter. Seconds later, another figure followed, taller, wearing a hood. The camera caught the glint of something metallic in his hand. He grabbed her arm. She struggled. The image flickered, static, then cleared just long enough for me to see the man's face. It wasn't Michael Carter. It was someone else. Someone I knew. I froze. My throat went dry. I replayed it. Frame by frame. No mistake. It was Detective Alan Pierce, the lead investigator on the case. And he had killed her. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The glow of the laptop screen still burned in my mind, that grainy image of Anna Carter's final moments, and the man I had once trusted with the truth standing over her. Detective Alan Pierce. Decorated. Respected. A man I'd called partner once upon a time. I sat in the dark of my study, staring at the city lights flickering beyond my window, those same lights that had once felt like a symbol of order, of justice. Now they looked like embers over a graveyard. Every decision I'd made in that courtroom crashed back at me like waves in a storm. My verdict had condemned an innocent man, because I believed the evidence. Because I believed him. By dawn, I poured my first drink in nearly 7 years. Whiskey. The old comfort of guilt. I knew what I had to do. The law was clear, I had to report it. Turn over the footage. Let the system handle it. But there was something worse than fear crawling inside me, doubt. Because I was the system. And I'd already seen what it did to truth. When I got to the courthouse that morning, everything felt wrong. The marble floors seemed colder. The portraits of past judges on the walls stared down at me like silent accusers. I went through my hearings like a ghost, speaking words that had lost all meaning. Objection sustained. Case dismissed. My lips moved, but my mind was back in that alley, watching Pierce's shadow move in the rain. After the last session, I called Sam. He answered on the first ring. "You saw it." "I saw it," I whispered. "God help me, I saw everything." A pause. "So what now?" "I need to go to the DA." "Estelle." "No," I said sharply. "If I don't, then what's left of me isn't worth saving." He exhaled. "Then be careful. You don't know how deep this goes." He was right. I didn't. But I was about to find out. That afternoon, I drove to the district attorney's office, a building that had once felt like home. The same halls where I'd argued my first case, the same offices where Pierce and I had toasted our first conviction. Now it felt like enemy ground. The DA, Warren Gates, greeted me with that politician's smile he never quite turned off. "Judge Monroe. To what do I owe the honor?" "I have evidence," I said quietly, locking the door behind me. "Evidence that changes everything about the Carter case." His smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I placed the USB on his desk. "This video shows that Anna Carter wasn't killed by her husband. It was Alan Pierce." He froze, the color draining from his face. "Pierce?" "Estelle, that's..." I saw it with my own eyes. He didn't reach for the drive. He just stared at it, then at me, like I had handed him a live grenade. Finally, he said, "Where did you get this?" "I can't tell you that." "That's a problem." His tone hardened. "Chain of custody matters. Unauthorized evidence can't be admitted in court." "Are you hearing yourself?" My voice cracked. "A man is rotting in prison for a murder he didn't commit." "Calm down," he snapped. "You don't understand what you're walking into." Pierce wasn't working alone. The Carter case was federal-backed. There were agencies involved: money, trafficking, politics. You stir this up, and you won't just lose your career. You'll disappear. I stared at him, stunned. "So you knew?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I took the drive back, sliding it into my pocket. "Then I'll go public." "Estelle." But I was already out the door. By the time I reached the parking lot, I knew I was being followed. A black SUV, 2 cars behind mine. No headlights. No plates I could read. I took a detour through the industrial district, my pulse hammering. Every stoplight felt like a countdown. Every reflection in the rearview mirror, a threat. When I finally pulled into the underground garage beneath my apartment, the SUV was gone. But the fear wasn't. Upstairs, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "Hello?" Static. Then a man's voice, calm, cold, familiar. "Judge Monroe," he said. "You shouldn't have opened that file." Alan Pierce. I froze. My throat went dry. "What do you want?" "To remind you that justice has a price. And you're about to pay it." The line went dead. I sank into the nearest chair, my hands trembling. The city outside looked endless, indifferent. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one delivering the sentence. I was the one waiting for it. By the next morning, my world was no longer mine. News anchors said my name like it was a headline for scandal, not justice. Judge Estelle Monroe under investigation for evidence tampering. The words echoed through every radio, every television, every whisper in the courthouse halls. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages from colleagues, reporters, even old friends, some sympathetic, most afraid to be seen caring. Someone had leaked something. Photos, maybe. Documents. Lies that painted me as unstable, compromised. And yet, deep down, I knew exactly who had done it. Alan Pierce. He didn't need to kill me to destroy me. All he needed was my reputation. I drove to work anyway. The courthouse, once my temple, felt like a tomb. When I stepped through those glass doors, silence followed me. Secretaries looked away. Bailiffs avoided eye contact. The clerk I'd mentored years ago handed me a file without saying a word. Inside, stapled to the front page, was a copy of the morning paper. My face stared back from the front cover. The corrupt judge of Carter case? I closed the file and walked to my chambers in silence. When I got there, the door was already open. 2 men in suits were waiting. Internal affairs. "Judge Monroe," one said. "We need to ask you some questions." "About what?" "About a missing evidence drive." My pulse quickened. "I have no idea what you're talking about." He raised a brow. "Funny. Because it was logged in our evidence system last night under your credentials." "That was impossible. I never." Then I remembered the DA's office. Warren Gates. He'd taken a copy. They searched my chambers for 2 hours. Turned everything upside down. They didn't find the drive, but that didn't matter. The damage was done. By noon, I was suspended pending investigation. By evening, reporters camped outside my apartment. When I finally locked my door behind me, I leaned against it, shaking. This was what Pierce wanted, to isolate me, to make me doubt myself, to break me before I could fight back. But he underestimated one thing. I wasn't done yet. I poured a glass of water, trying to steady my hands. On the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed again. A text. No name. Just an address. If you want proof, come alone. For a moment, I just stared at it. Every rational part of me screamed trap. But rationality had already cost me too much. I drove out to the address just after midnight. A warehouse on the edge of the docks, abandoned since the shipping company folded years ago. Rusted fences. Broken lights. The kind of place you don't walk into unless you're desperate or guilty. Inside, the air smelled of dust and salt. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. Mine. Then another pair. Estelle, said a voice from the shadows. Sam. He stepped into the flickering light, his face drawn, eyes tired. You shouldn't have come. I got a message. I sent it. I froze. Why? He hesitated. Because you need to understand what you're fighting. He pulled something from his coat, a file. Inside were photos, receipts, wire transfers, everything linking Pierce to a string of falsified convictions. Cases I'd presided over. I felt sick. How long have you known? Long enough to know you were next. Gates, Pierce, they used you, Estelle. You were the face they needed. Clean. Trusted. You made the convictions look legitimate. I took a step back, my stomach twisting. You're telling me every case. Not all, he said quickly. But enough to matter. The file slipped from my hands, pages scattering across the floor like fallen verdicts. I can't undo this, I whispered. Sam looked at me, his voice low. Then make it mean something. Go public. Don't let them bury the truth. Before I could answer, headlights flared through the broken windows. Engines roared outside. Sam's face went pale. They found us. Who? He didn't answer, he just grabbed my hand. Run. We bolted toward the back exit, boots echoing off the concrete. Gunshots cracked behind us, sharp, metallic, terrifyingly close. We dove behind a stack of rusted crates as bullets tore through the walls. Sam returned fire with a small pistol I didn't even know he carried. The air filled with smoke, the tang of gunpowder, and the shouts of men closing in. Estelle, he said between breaths, if I don't make it out. Don't you dare say that, I snapped. He gave a half smile, blood on his sleeve. Then run faster. We made it to the docks. The water glimmered beneath the moonlight, cold and endless. Behind us, sirens wailed. Ahead, only escape, or oblivion. We jumped. The shock of the water stole my breath, dragged me down into blackness. For a moment, I thought it was over, that Pierce had won. But when I broke the surface, gasping, Sam was beside me. Alive. Barely. We swam until the lights were distant specks on the horizon. That night, as we hid beneath a bridge, drenched and shivering, I realized something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Hope. Because for the first time, I wasn't running from the truth. I was running with it. The night we escaped into the river marked the death of Judge Estelle Monroe, and the birth of someone else entirely. I wasn't a judge anymore. I wasn't even sure I was innocent. All I knew was that truth had claws, and it was dragging me where it wanted me to go. Sam and I found shelter in an abandoned motel outside the city. The flickering neon sign read "Easy Rest," but there was nothing easy about resting that night. The sheets smelled of mildew. The hum of the vending machine outside sounded like distant thunder. Sam patched his arm with shaking hands, hissing under his breath. I watched in silence, the events of the last 24 hours replaying in my mind like a corrupted film reel. Who were those men? I finally asked. He didn't look up. Pierce's cleanup crew. They handle messes. And what are we? He gave a bitter smile. A liability that refuses to die. I sank back on the bed, my head pounding. Every case file, every sentence, every life I thought I had touched with fairness, now felt like evidence in a larger crime. I trusted the system, I whispered. I gave my life to it. Yeah, Sam muttered. So did a lot of people. That's what makes it the perfect weapon. He slid the recovered documents onto the bed between us. Pages detailing falsified evidence, coerced testimonies, fabricated lab results. Names I recognized, defendants, prosecutors, even judges. How deep does it go? I asked. Sam's eyes darkened. All the way to the top. I felt cold crawl up my spine. You mean? The Attorney General. Maybe more. For a long time, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window. Outside, a train howled in the distance, the kind of lonely sound that made you realize how small you really are. Finally, Sam spoke again. We need to get this to someone we can trust. Who? I asked, almost laughing. You just said everyone's compromised. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled card. A journalist's number. The Washington Sentinel. Her name's Lily Ward, he said. Investigative reporter. Spent years trying to expose Pierce's deals. He ruined her career. If anyone has a reason to help, it's her. I nodded slowly. Then we find her. But nothing in my life was that simple anymore. When I called the number, a woman answered, calm, cautious. This is Ward. Lily, my name is. I know who you are, she interrupted. And if you're calling me, it means you finally saw the monster under your robe. Her tone was sharp, but not unkind. You have evidence? Yes. Enough to bury him. Good, she said after a pause. Then let's meet. Tomorrow. 9 p.m. Old Power Station on Highway 19. Bring the files. Come alone. I hung up and looked at Sam. She'll help us. He stared at me like I'd just signed our death warrant. Estelle, people who try to expose Pierce don't get interviews. They get obituaries. I can't stop now, I said. Not after what I've seen. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Then I'm coming with you. The next evening, we reached the old power station just before dark. The sky was bruised purple, the air thick with the smell of rust and rain. The building loomed ahead, a skeleton of steel and silence. Stay close, Sam murmured. Inside, the air was cold and stale. The hum of distant machinery mixed with the drip of water through cracked concrete. We found Lily in the shadows, short hair, leather jacket, eyes that carried both defiance and exhaustion. She nodded once. You brought it? Sam handed over the files. Everything we have. She flipped through the pages, scanning quickly. Her expression hardened. This is worse than I thought. Before I could ask what she meant, headlights flashed across the windows. A dozen of them. Were you followed? Sam hissed. No, I said, but my voice trembled. Lily's face went pale. They're here. Gunfire shattered the windows before we could move. We dropped behind a control panel as bullets tore through the air. Sam fired back, shouting for us to run. I could barely hear over the chaos, the screams, the metal, the shattering glass. Then I saw Lily grab the files, shove them into a metal case, and press something into my hand. A small flash drive. Back up, she shouted. If I don't make it out, you keep it safe. Before I could answer, an explosion ripped through the room. The heat, the light, everything went white. When I woke, I was outside, half buried in rubble. The station burned behind me, orange flames clawing at the sky. Sam lay a few feet away, blood on his face, barely breathing. Sam! I crawled to him, shaking him. His eyes fluttered open. Go, Estelle. I'm not leaving you. He smiled weakly. You have to finish this. Sirens wailed in the distance, too close, too late. He pressed something into my hand, a folded photo. Him, Lily, and another man. Pierce. Together. Then his hand went limp. I screamed his name until my voice broke. The flames roared louder, swallowing the station, the truth, and the only friend I had left. As I stumbled into the night, clutching the flash drive, I knew what had to be done. I couldn't be Judge Monroe anymore. I had to become something else, something the system couldn't silence. That was the night I became the voice in the dark. I buried Sam at dawn. No headstone, no priest, no words, just a nameless grave by the river where the fog hung low and the world felt hollow. He deserved more. But the dead didn't need justice anymore. The living did. That morning, I became someone new. The judge and me died beside Sam. What rose from those ashes wasn't a woman seeking redemption, it was a voice determined to be heard. I moved through the city like a ghost, hiding in cheap motels, wearing thrift store clothes, keeping to alleys and bus stations. My reflection in cracked mirrors looked like a stranger, haunted eyes, bruised skin, hair streaked with ash. But inside, I had never been more alive. The flash drive burned like a heartbeat in my pocket. On it, the names, dates, and evidence of every false conviction Alan Pierce and his network had orchestrated. The drive was both salvation and death sentence. Whoever held it controlled the truth. I started small. A few encrypted emails sent to independent journalists, anonymous drops to advocacy groups. Every morning, new headlines emerged, dozens of convictions under review, insider claims DA's office manipulated evidence. Each article was a whisper. And every whisper grew louder. But power doesn't crumble quietly. Within a week, the FBI released an official statement calling me a person of interest in the death of Samuel Dean and the destruction of federal property. My photo was everywhere. Every channel, every screen. I was no longer Judge Monroe. I was the fugitive. And still, I kept sending files. One night, while hiding in an old diner off Route 14, I heard two truckers talking at the counter. "Did you hear about that judge lady?" one said, slurping his coffee. "They say she went crazy. Started leaking classified crap." "Crazy," the other snorted. "If half of what she's saying is true, she's got bigger balls than the whole system." I almost smiled into my cup of cold coffee. Maybe I wasn't just a fugitive. Maybe I was finally being understood. But understanding doesn't save you. 2 days later, I got the call. A burner phone I'd picked up from a convenience store buzzed at midnight. "Who is this?" I whispered. A distorted voice answered, low and metallic. "You're making too much noise, Estelle." My breath froze. "Pierce." He chuckled. "You always did love drama. But it's over. We both know how this ends." "Do we?" "You can't win. You think the truth matters? It doesn't. People forget. Stories fade. And you," his tone darkened, "you'll vanish like smoke before they even remember your name." I wanted to shout, to curse him, but my voice came out steady. "Maybe. But the truth will outlive both of us." He paused. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "Then let's find out." The line went dead. That was the last night I slept for more than an hour. Every corner, every shadow felt alive. I could feel him closing in, not just with men, but with words. The media began spinning new stories: disgraced judge faked evidence, fugitive behind deadly explosion. The truth was drowning in their lies. But I had one last card to play. Lily's contact, her editor, had reached out through a secure channel. They were willing to run everything. The files, the names, the connections. All of it. But I'd have to meet him face to face, hand over the drive in person. It was a risk. But it was the only way left. That night, I stood at a bus stop outside the city, the flash drive clutched in my palm. Rain fell in thin silver lines, washing the dirt and blood from my hands. I didn't know if I'd survive the night. But I did know this. Sam's death wouldn't be in vain. Lily's fire wouldn't go out. And maybe, just maybe, justice could still mean something. The bus pulled up, hissing as its doors opened. I stepped inside, blending with tired faces and blank stares. None of them knew who I was. None of them needed to. Sometimes the loudest truths are whispered by the fallen. And I was ready to whisper loud enough to shake the world. The bus rolled through the night like a confession no one wanted to hear. I sat near the back, rain streaking down the fogged window beside me, the flash drive clenched tight in my hand. Every bump in the road felt like a heartbeat, every shadow a warning. By dawn, I reached the outskirts of D.C., the place I once called home, now just a graveyard of ghosts I'd made. I checked into a motel under a false name. Caroline Eastman. A name pulled from an old obituary. In the mirror, I rehearsed my story, my tone, my resolve. The woman looking back at me wasn't Judge Monroe anymore. She was something harder, colder, but alive. Lily's editor was named Thomas Cade, a veteran journalist with a reputation for chasing truths that burned careers to ash. If anyone could get the story out, it was him. But trust had become a luxury I could no longer afford. We arranged to meet in an old library basement, one of those quiet, forgotten places that smelled of dust and history. The irony wasn't lost on me. Once, I stood in marble courtrooms surrounded by law books and ideals. Now I hid beneath them, hunted by the same truth I'd sworn to protect. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, tall, silver-haired, trench coat worn at the collar. His eyes, though tired, had a kind of restless energy. "Judge Monroe," he said softly. "Or do you prefer Caroline these days?" I froze. "How do you?" He smiled faintly. "Relax. I'm not your enemy." I stayed standing. "That's what everyone says before they become one." He nodded, as if I'd proven his point. "You brought it?" I took out the flash drive, still warm from being held too long. "This is everything. Names, payments, surveillance. Pierce's entire network. If you release this, the system collapses," he finished for me. "And every conviction linked to you gets reopened." I hesitated. "So you already know what's in it?" He tapped his temple. "I make it my business to know." There was something in his tone, too rehearsed, too certain. My stomach tightened. "How long have you been talking to Pierce?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "Long enough to know he's losing control. Long enough to know he's afraid of you." "That doesn't answer the question." He sighed. "Estelle, you've been running for weeks. You're tired, scared, desperate. Pierce is dangerous, but this isn't the way. You leak that drive, and innocent lives will be caught in the fire. Agents. Informants. Whistleblowers. People who had nothing to do with him." I felt my pulse in my throat. "You're trying to stop me." "I'm trying to save you," he said, stepping closer. "Give me the drive. Let me redact what's necessary. We'll release the truth safely." Safely. I'd heard that word my whole career, the safe verdict, the safe choice, the safe lie. "I don't believe you," I whispered. He exhaled, the kindness draining from his face. "Then you're not giving me much choice." From behind the stacks, two men stepped out, black suits, earpieces, the kind of quiet menace that never needed words. I backed away, clutching the flash drive to my chest. "You're with him." Thomas's voice was almost regretful. "You should have stayed in hiding." The men advanced. I bolted down a narrow aisle, knocking over a shelf as I ran. Papers flew, books crashed. My heart hammered in my ears. One of them grabbed my arm, I slammed his head against a pillar and tore free. Another reached for his gun. I dove behind a desk as the first shot cracked through the silence. wood splintered inches from my head. I crawled toward the exit, adrenaline screaming through every vein. The flash drive was slick with blood, my own, I realized, from a grazing bullet. Then a voice echoed through the library, calm and cruel. You can't run from the ghosts you made, Estelle. Pierce. He stepped out from the shadows, as composed as ever, dark suit, perfect posture, the same dead eyes that once testified in my court. You always did like the drama, he said, almost smiling. Now look at you, judge, jury, fugitive. I stood, trembling but defiant. You killed them. You killed Lily, Sam. They made their choices. He shrugged. So did you. I trusted you. That was your first mistake. He motioned for the men to lower their weapons and stepped closer, voice low and venomous. You want to destroy me? Fine. But when you fall, no one will remember why. They'll just remember the scandal. The crazy judge. The traitor to her country. I raised the flash drive. Maybe. But the truth will still be out there. He smirked. Not if you're not alive to tell it. He lunged. I swung the metal lamp beside me, catching him across the face. He stumbled, just long enough for me to sprint toward the emergency exit. Bullets followed. Glass shattered. The night air hit me like fire as I burst into the alley. I didn't stop running. Rain soaked through my clothes, washing away the blood, the dirt, maybe even the fear. I ran until the city blurred into streaks of light and noise, until the ghosts chasing me were just echoes in the distance. But one truth burned clear in my mind. If Pierce wanted to silence me, he'd have to face what he created. Because the ghosts we make never rest. And now, I was one of them. The storm followed me like a curse. By the time I reached the edge of Arlington, my lungs burned, my hands shook, and the flash drive felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. The world outside was blurred, sirens in the distance, thunder rolling above, but inside me, everything was razor sharp. I had nowhere left to go. No friends. No safe contacts. But I remembered one name. Evan. He was a former FBI tech, quiet, brilliant, and once my courtroom expert on digital forensics. Years ago, he'd testified against a cartel Pierce later protected. A week after that trial, he disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd run. I knew better. He'd been forced underground, like me now. It took 3 burner phones and a whispered chain of favors to reach him. When I finally heard his voice, distant and mechanical through the encrypted line, I almost didn't believe it. Who is this? He asked. It's Estelle, I said softly. I need help. There was a long silence. Then. Took you long enough. The safe house was hidden behind an abandoned auto garage on the Potomac's southern edge. Rust peeled off the walls, the air smelled of oil and rain. But inside, the lights glowed warm, servers humming softly, screens casting blue over Evan's gaunt, sleepless face. He hadn't changed much. The same dark hair now streaked with gray, the same eyes that missed nothing. You're lucky I still monitor the chatter, he said, typing furiously. Pierce has a federal warrant out for you, terrorism, espionage, obstruction. He's painting you as a traitor. I dropped the soaked coat to the floor. He's scared. That's all I need to know. He looked up. You got proof? I held out the flash drive. Everything. Lily and Sam died for it. Evan took it like it was a live grenade. You know what happens if we open this? We'll both be targets. I've been one for months, I said. You might as well join me. He stared at me for a long moment before sighing. You always were terrible at small talk. Hours passed in silence, the air filled only with the hum of fans and the rhythm of rain against the roof. I watched Evan work, decrypting files, cross-referencing logs, muttering to himself. His hands moved like someone dismantling a bomb. Then he froze. His eyes darted across the screen. Jesus, Estelle. What is it? He turned the monitor toward me. There were folders, dozens of them. Case files. Surveillance records. Payoffs. Classified communications. And under a directory labeled Monroe/private, I saw my own transcripts. My calls. My emails. My rulings. He'd been watching me from the start. I sank into the chair, breath gone. He built his case through me. Evan nodded grimly. You weren't a partner. You were leverage. Rage and guilt twisted inside me until I could barely speak. Every decision I'd made to protect the system, every ruling, every silence, had been feeding Pierce's machine. Can you trace it? I asked finally. I can do more than that. He typed faster, the screens flickering as he tunneled through encrypted networks. If we route this through dead servers and drop it in segments across international networks, we can get it to the press before they shut us down. I hesitated. That'll expose every name. He looked at me. You still care about them after everything? I closed my eyes. Faces flashed in the dark, jurors, agents, people who'd trusted me. People who might die if the files went public raw. Then redact, I whispered. Protect who you can. But Pierce's name goes first. He smiled faintly. There's the judge I remember. By dawn, the upload began. Progress bars crawled across the screen, slow, relentless, irreversible. I stepped outside for air. The storm had broken. Mist hung low over the Potomac, the city skyline distant and ghostly. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like calm. Then my burner phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Hello? A voice I hadn't heard in years, calm, deep, unmistakably familiar. Judge Monroe. This is Director Hayes. My blood ran cold. Hayes, the head of internal security. The man who'd once sworn that corruption would never touch his agency. You're in over your head, he said. Pierce is going down, but if you leak classified data, you'll go with him. It's already done, I said. You think the public will understand? You think they'll care about justice more than the chaos that follows? I swallowed hard. I don't care what they understand. I care that they know. Hayes paused. You've always been stubborn. Maybe, I said. But at least I can live with myself. He sighed. Then I hope you live long enough to try. The line went dead. Behind me, Evans shouted from inside, It's done. I turned, the rising sun bleeding gold through the mist. For a moment, I let myself breathe. But deep down, I knew, Pierce wasn't finished. And neither was I. Because the truth doesn't end with revelation. It ends with choice. The world didn't explode after the leak. It just shifted. The morning headlines screamed betrayal and justice in the same breath. Pierce's name was everywhere, his secret accounts, his falsified orders, the names of people he'd ruined to keep his empire breathing. But instead of relief, I felt only silence. Not peace, just the heavy kind that follows a funeral. Evan sat beside me, scrolling through feeds on half a dozen monitors. They're calling you a hero, he said. And a criminal. Depends on the network. I didn't do it to be either. My voice sounded distant. I just wanted it to stop. He nodded, but I could see the concern in his eyes. You know he won't go quietly, right? Men like Pierce don't fade. They burn. I knew. I could feel it, that unshakable tension, like thunder waiting just beyond the clouds. 3 days later, the first attempt came. A car outside the safe house exploded in the middle of the night. We'd been lucky, too cautious to sleep in the same place twice. But it was a message. Pierce wasn't running. He was hunting. Evan slammed his laptop shut. We've got to move again. I didn't answer. My eyes were on the flames rising in the distance. Not yet, I said. He wants me afraid. I've lived enough of that. Evan turned to me, his voice sharp. Estelle, you exposed one of the most powerful men in Washington. You think he'll let you walk away? I met his gaze. I don't want to walk away. He stared for a moment, then understood. You're going to him. The address was buried in the decrypted files, a private estate outside Richmond. A place Pierce had used for off-site briefings. Now, it was his bunker. I drove through the night, headlights cutting through fog like slow lightning. Every mile felt heavier, not from fear, but from memory, Lily's laughter, Sam's quiet loyalty, the hundreds of verdicts I'd signed believing in a system that was already infected. By the time I reached the gates, the sun was just beginning to rise. The guard recognized me immediately. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of confusion between orders and disbelief. Before he could reach for his radio, I lifted my hand. I'm here for him, I said. He's expecting me. And somehow, that was true. Because the gates opened. Pierce was waiting inside. No security detail this time. Just him, standing at the end of a long marble hall, his reflection fractured across glass and light. Estelle, he said, his tone half admiration, half mockery. You've caused quite a storm. I stepped forward slowly. You left me no choice. Choice, he repeated, almost laughing. That's what you think this was? You always were the moralist. You think truth saves people? It destroys them. I clenched my fists. Truth doesn't destroy. Lies do. He moved closer, hands in his pockets, voice soft. And what about the innocent names you exposed? The agents compromised because you couldn't keep your conscience quiet? Don't twist it. I don't need to. You did that yourself. He smiled faintly. You become exactly what you judged. A vigilante in robes. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then I remembered the faces of the dead. And I remembered who I was before fear rewrote me. I pulled a small recorder from my coat. I didn't come here to argue. He frowned. What is that? Insurance. I pressed play. His own voice filled the room, a recording Evan had pieced together from encrypted archives. Pierce, giving orders to erase evidence, to silence witnesses, to neutralize me if necessary. His face drained of color. You don't know what you've done, he said quietly. I know exactly what I've done, I whispered. I gave the world the truth. The rest is up to them. He lunged, too fast for his age, too desperate for control, but before he reached me, I raised the small revolver Evan had insisted I carry. The sound that followed wasn't loud. It was soft. Like the end of a sentence. He collapsed to the marble, eyes wide, unblinking, the final lie frozen in his throat. I stood over him, shaking, the recorder still humming in my hand. When the police arrived hours later, I didn't resist. I told them everything, every file, every threat, every name. They called me a whistleblower. Some called me a murderer. I didn't argue either way. In my statement, I wrote one sentence that mattered. Silence is not justice. They say history forgets those who fall between hero and traitor. Maybe that's true. But as I sit here now, weeks later, in a gray cell that smells of dust and truth, I feel something I haven't in years. Peace. Not the peace of winning, but the peace of finally stopping the war inside myself. Evan visits sometimes. He tells me the files led to investigations, that reforms are coming. I don't ask if it's true. Because sometimes, all that matters is that you tried. The night they moved me to protective custody, I looked out through the transport window. The city lights shimmered below like fragile stars. For the first time in a long while, I whispered to myself. They say justice is blind. And as the horizon turned gold with morning, I added softly. But sometimes, it finally sees.